February 19th, 1950. Joseph McCarthy announces in a speech that he has a list of 205 known communists and that he was going to jail every last one of them. McCarthy was the embodiment of anti-communist paranoia in the 1950s. He led countless attacks on alleged communist sympathizers, and thousands of U.S. citizens were forced to appear to prove their loyalty to the United States. So how did the U.S. come to believe that they were being infiltrated by the Soviet Union in the first place? To realize how this really started, we're going to have to take a look back at the first Red Scare. After the end of World War I, American citizens were afraid of the rise in the number of anarchists and communists in the United States. In 1919, there were a series of bombings throughout the United States. The people behind these bombings were Italian anarchists. That April, anarchists mailed over 30 dynamite bombs to prominent U.S. politicians that were anti-anarchists and wreaking havoc throughout the U.S. 2 months later, on June 2nd, 8 bombs went off around the country, all within 90 minutes of each other, once again targeting the enemies of anarchists. One of these bombs was detonated near the house of Attorney General Mitchell Palmer. The whole nation was shaken by these attacks, and something had to be done. Attorney General Palmer was an avid anti-communist and was responsible for what was labeled as the Palmer Raids. From 1918 to 1921, a massive spree of arrests and deportations occurred across the nation. The reasoning was usually due to the fact that the accused was a member of the Communist Party. This started a trend in the attitude of policies toward the Communist Party, mainly in that the Communist Party was to be suppressed. The early Roosevelt administration. During his presidency, Franklin Delano Roosevelt widened the reach and limits of what the FBI was able to do. In 1936, FDR told FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to investigate fascist and communist activities. This order ended a ban lasting from 1924 that disallowed the FBI to become politically involved in any way. This widening of limitations allowed the FBI more leniency on what they could do for an investigation. Meanwhile, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO, were hiring Communist Party members as organizers. The CIO was a federation of industrial unions, which grew rapidly during the Great Depression. Founded in 1935, the CIO hired communists because the Communist Party pushed for industrial unions. They were exceptional militant union organizers and fiercely took control of a large stake of the CIO. But in the 1930s, the practice of red baiting became a commonly used political strategy. The term red baiting means that one party is discrediting another party's argument by accusing them of being communist sympathizers. This was primarily used by Republicans against Democrats and anti-New Deal arguments. In 1938, Congressman Martin Dies established the Dies Committee to investigate communist and fascist activities, disloyal or subversive parties. Now there was a committee that people could turn to that would take cases where the only accusation would be that the defendant was a communist. In 1940, the Smith Act was passed, also called the Alien Registration Act. This made it illegal to advocate for or teach the violent overthrow of the government. What we can take away from this is that Congress was afraid of communist influence. They wanted to stop the Communist Party in its tracks. September 2nd, 1939. The Nazi-Soviet Pact was signed, and Germany attacked Poland, starting the largest war in history. The United States Communist Party advocated to stay out of the war. They knew that the U.S. would be on the side of the Allies, which means the U.S. would be fighting the Russians. However, when Germany invaded Russia in 1941, the Communist Party was on full support of joining the war. To help with the war effort, the Communist Party suspended all labor strikes until the war was over. This immediate reversal of policy was alarming to the people. It made it seem like the Communist Party was taking orders straight from Moscow. There was an old joke back then that goes, "Why is the Communist Party like the Brooklyn Bridge? Both are entirely suspended by cables." September 2nd, 1945, World War II ends. Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt had already met at the Yalta Conference to plan Europe's future. Russia had gained control of a large portion of Europe, essentially creating the Iron Curtain and initiating the Cold War. After the war was over and tensions between the US and Russia were high, the CIO became hostile to the Communist Party. The CIO started to take control away from the Communist Party members, driving them out of their positions. This was the first of many signs that the Communist Party was hated the most it had ever been. In 1946, the Dies Committee renamed itself the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC. Once the Cold War started, the HUAC became exceedingly active on finding and jailing possible subversive parties. What the HUAC started to do is what McCarthy's activities will be based off of later. In 1947, the Truman Doctrine was revealed. It was initially made to fight the spread of communism in Greece and Turkey, but eventually was expanded by the Marshall Plan to reach all of Europe. The United States was essentially fighting communism now, which made the Communist Party seem like enemies of the state. But not 2 weeks after the Truman Doctrine was revealed, Executive Order 9835 was put into place. It was named the Loyalty Order because it formed the Loyalty Review Board. The way the board functioned was that the departments had to give info to the board, and the board chose to subpoena people if they had any reason to believe that they were disloyal. Part 5, Section 1 states, "The standard for the refusal of employment on grounds relating to loyalty shall be that, on all evidence, reasonable grounds exist for belief that the person involved is disloyal to the government of the United States." This executive order essentially created a system that constantly checks for signs of disloyalty and the ability to dismiss anyone on unsubstantial evidence. On November 25, 1947, the HUAC called 41 people involved with the movie industry to appear before them due to subversive activities. Most of the accused pled the Fifth Amendment, but 10 screenwriters and directors challenged the HUAC, calling a violation of the First Amendment. They were nicknamed the Hollywood 10. These people were Herbert Biberman, Alva Bessie, Dalton Trumbo, Ring Larder Jr., Albert Maltz, Lester Cole, Samuel Orens, Edward Dimitri, John Howard Lawson, and Adrian Scott. Their case was hard fought, but in the end, the HUAC won. Every individual was cited for contempt of Congress and sent to prison. After they were released, their careers were ruined. They were put on the Hollywood blacklist. The blacklist was a list held by Hollywood, and it contained every filmmaker who had a bad reputation involving subversive accusations. It was used to make sure that Hollywood kept a good reputation. The freedom of expression was in jeopardy, which was a First Amendment right. Congressman George Dondereau said about modern art, "Modern art is communistic because it is distorted and ugly, because it does not glorify our beautiful country, our cheerful and smiling people, and our great material progress. Art which does not portray our beautiful country in plain, simple terms that everyone can understand breeds dissatisfaction. It is therefore opposed to our government, and those who create it and promote it are our enemies." In 1948, Taft-Hartley Act was put into place. The act essentially made all union officials sign an affidavit, swearing that they had no ties to communism. This forced all remaining Communist Party members out of labor unions and out of the CIO. On August 14, 1948, Whittaker Chambers accused Alger Hiss of being a Russian spy in the 1930s and 40s in front of the HUAC. Hiss was formerly a U.S. State Department official and formerly a UN official. Whittaker Chambers, an ex-communist, accused Alger Hiss of being a Russian spy and handing Chambers secret documents in the 30s and 40s, including during World War II. Chambers brought these accusations in front of the HUAC. The evidence against Hiss was too weak to convict him, and it seemed that all options were useless for accusing Hiss. Chambers finally revealed secret film slides containing stolen documents that Chambers said that Hiss had given to him. the HUAC still could not convict Hiss. Hiss went to jail, not for treason, but for perjury. This shows how the government was out to imprison anyone accused of subversive acts. The Red Scare was similar to other periods in history in which a group was feared and targeted for persecution. The Spanish Inquisition was a 400-year scare, lasting from the 1400s to the 1800s. Non-Catholics were targeted for crimes that were never committed. It was used as a tool by the people in power to dispose of their rivals. The Spanish Inquisition used the fear of the people to justify what they were doing. February 19th, 1950. Joseph McCarthy announces in a speech that he has a list of 205 known communists and that he was going to jail every last one of them. McCarthyism was not a sudden phenomenon, with blind patriotism leading the charge. Whatever McCarthy did was going to happen. In fact, it had already started happening in the US.